Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Hughes. I'm going to be talking today about creating community connections. I'm here with Cecile Sullivan Elder from Family
Afternoon.
Advocacy and Clara as well. So Clara's in the background making everything work really, really smoothly today. So just a little bit about me. I'm the parent of Jacob Hughes, who is 27 years old, nearly 28 actually, and I've been working with the establishing a self-manager hub, and that's with Cedar and the Growing Space, and that will be launched shortly. So there will be some resources available for self-managers shortly on the self-manager hub. But I'm going to start off just now with an acknowledgement of country. I actually need to start my PowerPoint, don't I? Can you see that screen on there, Clara?
Yes, it's full.
Okay, so there we go. So I am here on a Awabakal land here in Newcastle, and I would like to acknowledge that the land was never ceded, and I would like to pay my respects to the Awabakal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm on. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians on the land of which you're on as well, around New South Wales or perhaps even around Australia. I recognise and appreciate our First Nations people's ongoing connection to the land, water, community and culture. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I warmly welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us here today. Okay. And thank you for all of you coming along today. I hope you're able to make yourself comfortable. It's an hour webinar, so it's a little bit of time, but hopefully we've packed in enough information for you to make it interesting. We are recording the webinar, so it could be available later. We've got a couple of quick polls. They're quick surveys, so we can get a bit of information about you, who's in the room and what do you know already, and see how we go at the end. There's questions at the end as well, so if you've got any questions, it'd be great if you can press the button that says Q&A and put your question in there. If you have some difficulty accessing Q&A, if you're using a screen reader, for example, and you can't access a Q&A button easily, then you can send your question to info@ric.org.au. After the webinar, Resourcing Inclusive Communities will send you a survey by email. I think it might also be in the chat box. It's a survey, external survey, a SurveyMonkey survey. So if you just want to click that link and complete the survey, that really helps us know how we're going with the webinars and what is working and what we can improve on. So that's really good information for us. And if you'd like any more information, you can contact Resourcing Inclusive Communities, and their website is www.ric.org.au. I'm going to pass you over to Cecile for a bit of an intro to family advocacy and resourcing inclusive communities.
I think the polls are first.
Oh, sorry, the polls. Polls first.
So polls.
Thank you. Thank you. So the first question is, who is in the room? So if you could click on the link that's going to go out in just a moment, and Clara will, if you just click on the room, who's in the room, and Clara will collect that information. And we'll just give you 10 or 15 seconds to do that.
Here we go.
Okay, cool. Well, is it 1%? Of people, of the participants are people with disability. The vast majority are family members, and we also have 1%. Sorry, it's
1
person. Well, yeah, one person who works in the sector as well. So we'll close that and we'll ask the next question in the poll. How confident do you feel about building community connections and relationships for yourself or your family member? Okay, thank you.
Share results.
Okay, so there's a lot of people who aren't confident, and I'm just going to look on this screen. about 45% aren't confident, and there's 55% who are reasonably confident, and no one is very confident. So hopefully you'll feel there'll be people will feel more confident after today. And there's some great resources that I will direct you to as well at the end of the webinar. So now I will pass over to Cecile to talk about family advocacy and resourcing inclusive communities.
Thank you very much, Linda. Look, welcome everybody this afternoon. This is the last of 3 webinars and certainly the last of our self-management project, which has been going on for 12 months now. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be here, and particularly Linda for sharing her insights over the next hour or so. For those of you that don't know, Family Advocacy is a statewide organisation that's a disability advocacy organisation that was founded by family members of people with disabilities. It's been around for around 29 years. The main focus of the work that we do is around supporting families to advocate with or on behalf of their family member with disabilities, what's in their interest, and to promote and protect the vulnerability that their family member may experience. The organisation 29 years later is still governed by family members of people with disability and staffed by family members, people with disability family members and allies also. We've got 3 major areas of the work that we do when we're considering advocacy. The first is providing individual advocacy support across New South Wales. We have an advocacy and leadership development team that undertakes that. We also have a systemic advocacy arm of the organisation that actually looks at removing barriers that are in existence for people with disabilities, particularly in relation to access, inclusion, and just generally being able to participate in the day-to-day things that most of us would take for granted, whether it's a regular education, creating a home of your own, employment into real jobs for real pay, all that sort of thing. So we've got a systems advocacy arm that deals with that area of barriers that exist for people with disabilities. We also are currently supporting people with disabilities and families across New South Wales to engage with the work of the Disability Royal Commission. This is obviously a 2-year piece of work alongside the duration of the Disability Royal Commission running, and our role in that is really to inform as many people as possible, to motivate, I suppose, too, in relation to the importance of participating in this process, because it actually has the opportunity to lead to many good things. But the Disability Royal Commissioners need to hear the issues that have gone on for people, both historically and currently. Moving right along to the next slide, Linda, if you don't mind. So another area of work that we do within family advocacy is the work that we're currently doing now, which falls within our initiative, as Linda explained, Resourcing Inclusive Communities. This was launched in 2010 with a particular focus on self-direction and self-management, actually. And we provide and have provided lots of capacity building projects that actually look at people with disabilities having the skills and the knowledge and the confidence to be able to go forth and create really innovative and contemporary models of support and solutions around living ordinary and typical lives in the heart of community. So this is one such project that's coming to an end now. We've actually got another project that started, which is around employment from school to work, and it's creating meaningful employment pathways for students with disabilities. This is going to be a 3-year project with work commencing externally in probably around September, so people can be involved with that. So certainly watch this space, as well as any sort of, if you get email updates or our Facebook page for more information around that. Generally though, you can contact Resourcing Inclusive Communities around any information that you might have, from creating a home of your own, whether it's employment, whether it's creating a vision, self-management. Please feel free to make contact through our email and our 1-800 number and for more information. So enough from me, and over to Linda, and look forward to hearing your presentation over the next hour or so.
Thanks, Cecile. I just want to also just say that, it's the resources from Family Advocacy and Resourcing Inclusive Communities that have really guided me and helped me and our family think about, and Jacob think about his life as well. So just check out the resources there. They're amazing. So This is the third webinar. So the first webinar, we talked about the importance of having a vision and starting with the person and hopes and dreams for the best life. And this gives us direction and it helps us move towards the dream. So I suppose if you're thinking about, if you've got a decision to make, you can think, well, will this take me closer towards the vision for myself or my family member? Will it help me get there? It might not be the direct route, but is it taking me closer or further away? And that's a really good way of helping you make decisions. Given the importance of relationships, I think it's really likely that your vision would address belonging and friendships and the family and the importance of that in your life or your family member's life. Our vision for Jake is that he's surrounded by family and friends and people who love and care about him. And it's just something that simple is in our vision. But it also means that we are mindful that this stuff doesn't necessarily happen by accident, and we need to actually create opportunities for Jacob to develop relationships with people. Jacob has given me his permission to talk about him today. Jake's got a pretty significant disability. Communication's pretty tricky for him. So that he is a person who does need assistance and prompting to develop a relationship. He tends to be somebody who takes a little while to warm up to people. But once he knows you or has met a person and he likes them, he can be quite outgoing and quite gregarious. In the second webinar, we spoke about support teams and managing support teams. And you would have heard, if you were here, me talk about the various roles that we have for support workers. And support workers are there to help you, achieve your goals and your move towards your vision, achieving your vision. We have a role called a social connector, and that's based on the recognition that it's harder for Jake to develop relationships and maintain relationships than it might be for other people. And as I said, needs some assistance with communication and certainly support in maintaining and keeping contact with people. Jake's recently actually learnt the benefit of FaceTime, which is quite nice. So COVID times, and he's now loving FaceTime. I'll come back to
too, Linda. I'll just say to everybody out there too, if you weren't a part of the first webinar or the second webinar, incidentally, just contact the info email address and we can actually send you the link to that if you've missed that.
Sorry, I'll just be 1 second. We'll come back to the role of support workers in creating community connections. They're really important. So, it's people who need support to create community connections. The role of support worker can be, very important. But I wanted to start with on the basis of, community connections are in essence freely given relationships. So while paid support workers are important, I just want to be mindful that they can get in the way of freely given relationships. And I'm just going to tell a little story about a lady I met a few years ago. And when I met her, she told me that one of her goals was to go to church. She actually lived just a couple of kilometers away from the church that she had been brought up in. Her parents had been churchgoers, and she had had an active presence in the church for most of her life until her parents died, and she moved to a group home. And my role there was a different role, but upon hearing this, I'm not a church-going person myself, but I know people who are, and I just quickly made a couple of phone calls, and yes, there's people who remember her. The volunteer ladies and at the church in particular remembered her and her family very fondly, and there was a real connection. There was an opportunity for connection there, and she didn't live far away, and we could organize someone to pick her up and go to church. I'll just explain so that the service provider that she was with also understood that this was an important thing for her, and their solution had been church on a Tuesday at a community hall. And of course, that was really unsatisfactory. It wasn't her church. It was in a community hall. It was a Tuesday. It was a whole lot of things that weren't right about that. Anyway, the service provider was a bit concerned about volunteers picking her up, and they decided that they would she hadn't been going to church because there wasn't enough support workers, but they had managed to get someone in, and etc. But the upshot was that with the support worker driving her to and from church, the support worker didn't have those connections with others in, at the church. They weren't necessarily religious as well. They didn't share that interest. And it was often a different support worker each week. And so she just needed a bit more support to engage with the other parishioners and the people who knew her. And then there wasn't someone available, so she'd miss, and etc. And I just wanted to just say that's an example of where the provider and the support has actually got in the way. There was actually some freely given relationships which would have been there ready for her to tap into. So it's not a happy story, but it's a little bit of a warning that support is great, but where you can tap into some existing connections or create some new connections where there might be freely given relationships with people who are sharing the same interest and the passion, that's something that is a really good idea to do. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So we'll talk about support later, but because I don't want that to be the focus, but it certainly is important. So the importance of relationships, I think we all know this. This is, that personal sense of well-being that you get from relationships with your family, friends, and just being connected to your community in general. So that might be even those further relationships out where, you have an acquaintance or people that you know in your area, but might not necessarily know them well, but there's a reciprocal relationship there. Sense of belonging and identity. Jacob is a Toastmaster. So one of his passions is public speaking, which is kind of ironic. I'll explain in a little bit. But Jacob's been a Toastmaster for many, many years, and that's he has a real sense of belonging, and it's a lovely group of people that he's with at the Newcastle University Toastmasters Club. It gives you relationships enrich your lives and give you purpose, something to get up and go to bed, get up out of the morning, get out of bed to go towards. So you've got to be somewhere, you've got something to do. It's purpose in our lives.
Yeah, something I'd add to that too, Linda, would be that sense of contribution.
Yes,
very
purpose
important.
and contribution, absolutely. And and they're an important safeguard, and they're a really important safeguard in the lives of people with disabilities. In the first webinar, we briefly spoke about developmental investments as a safeguard. That's where social capital is a safeguard for people. And basically social capital just means those social networks that you have around you, the people who know you, the people who are looking out for you. And, safety comes from people who we know us personally, and will take that extra effort to check in that we're okay. And or if we look anxious and upset, to follow up on that. It's really unlikely. We actually know there's some really recent tragic examples of where service systems and government and organizations have let people down tragically. People with disabilities are often isolated, and many people need assistance to develop and maintain interpersonal connections. And there's not a magic formula for it at all, but there's strategies that can help and opportunities to make it more likely to happen. So this is just a little bit of research that I did just recently, and casual friendships can on average take about 60 hours to develop, and strong relationships can take 200 hours. And I just thought that was fascinating. And this is not to say that it's too hard or how am I going to do that, but it is a reminder that developing and sustaining relationships does take time, and it does take effort. And it's a level of mindfulness that we need ongoing. It's sort of like an underlying current of every part of our day, particularly if you're relationship poor or friendship poor, you don't have a lot of relationships in your life.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I was fascinated to see that. And I think that, sometimes we might think that, well, my son or daughter or I went to this event and I no one wanted to talk to me, and it actually takes something much more sustained than that to develop those relationships.
But for everybody, that's a really good point.
This is for everybody. This is
Mm.
for everybody. Yeah. So I've just put the link to the research there if you wanted to follow up and do some more research. But that's just yeah. I'm just going to say it's really a good idea to start close to home and start with family, and the expectations that we have of perhaps of our family member, and the roles that the person might have in the family. And it's just really good to sort of check our own expectations, um, and just to make sure that the people closest have an expectation of particular roles in the family, that we are giving responsibility and opportunities for that person to contribute and participate and be an active member of our family. And we've thought about this from time to time with Jacob. So Jacob, he is a very good grandson. My mum lives around the corner, Jacob's grandma, and Jacob and her are in contact every day. He checks in on her if she hasn't actually knocked on the door and come over. He's now asking in the afternoon to FaceTime grandma just to make sure that she's okay.
Okay.
She plays golf, and sometimes sort of, we miss her for a day, but other, she's someone Jacob's role has a role there in just being the best grandson. Jacob has been the babysitter of his younger cousins. Jacob's got a camera mounted onto his on his wheelchair, so he's now starting to take photos. So we've got ambitions that maybe he could be the family photographer. And Jacob is the social organizer, and you can see in that picture there, that's Jacob brings people together very, very easily and readily, and that might be family, friends, and new friends. The other roles that are close to home is that of a good neighbour. So really thinking about what might be happening in the neighbourhood, where you can just get to know people by just, by offering some assistance. If a neighbour's going away, just offer to watch their house or water their garden, collect mail. Walking the dog around the neighborhood is another really good way of getting to know people. We've got a puppy. Jake has a puppy, and particularly during COVID times when we were in lockdown back in March, it's much better here now. But in March and April, there was a lot of people out on the street doing their exercise and walking around, and we got to know a few of the neighbors. There's one of the neighbors up at the corner, who we've never met before, had a joke of the day. They had a sign out each day, and there was a joke of the day on the front pavement, which was always a place to stop and then socially distance chat with other people. Sorry, I've just oh, that's right. Yeah. So the other thing that Jake does is we've got a lemon tree. So we have Jacob, when we've got too many lemons, just hands out lemons to our neighbours. And there's other ways you could grow herbs or other things like that if you have that space to do that. But it's just finding ways in your neighbourhood where there's ways of connecting with people. Sometimes it might even be asking a favour. I'm going away. Can you keep a watch of my house? Just really asking something really, really small, but just beginning to have that greater connection with neighbours if you don't have already. So I think during COVID, once again, we saw a lot of neighbourhoods having driveway get-togethers where everyone hangs out on the driveway at their respective houses and gets to know. So perhaps, thinking about even being the instigator of that in your neighbourhood. I'm also going to mention
people talk about too, having neighbourhood like barbecues and things. They're very intentionally inviting along their closest neighbours.
Yep, I think that's sort of just really sort of instigating those relationships or taking what might be a wave across the driveway to the next level. So it's just those really small things that you can start to do just to increase that connection. And as I said, all of this stuff just needs to be mindful all the time. It's, you know, every connection has, I suppose, a bit of potential. And so just sort of thinking about, well, you know, I've waved across the driveway, what might be another step to getting to know my neighbors better if you don't know them already, or just having those thinking, just having it in your front of your mind as these are people who could be great to get to know, who can expand your network, and also your neighbors they're looking out for you. That's a really great safeguard as well. And also just looking at what's going on locally, you know, having a local, so that's having a cafe that you tend to go to, or a pub that you tend to go to. Jacob, my son Jacob, quite likes going to the pub. There's 8 pubs in our suburb. I just counted them yesterday, and so it's important that rather than going to random pubs, that there's one pub that Jacob's goes to, and people have got to know him there. Similar thing with trivia nights. You know, there's looking for what's local and what's happening. Shop local as well. If there's a sort of shopping centre, if there's local shops near you, if you can just pop down there, it just really gets you out and known in your neighbourhood. And of course, libraries and community centres. Following a local band, that's another way that might be at different venues. But there's always, you know, the usual suspects who turn up to see a band, and get to know each other as well. So, you know, such and such is playing, we'll go and watch them, even if it's at a different venue than usual. And I think if you just have a think about where in your neighborhood do people hang out, where in your community. I acknowledge that there might be people who live in very suburban areas or very remote areas who don't have where there's not a hub, but I'd be looking for the closest hub. I suppose that's the word I'd be using, is where things are happening in your neighborhood, where there might be a hub. If it is a big shopping center, that might not be ideal. There's a lot of randomness occurs in shopping centers, where it's harder to create relationships. There's a greater variety of workers. There's people who aren't going to necessarily get to know you as well. Jake, for a long time, he wanted to go to McDonald's. He would buy a burger for the dog. Actually, that was what our poor puppy. He thought that she really did like a junior burger, and that was one of his things, is to go and get her a junior burger from McDonald's. But you know, and I think the atmosphere of McDonald's and things like that. But we actually sort of started talking to him, like, each time you go to McDonald's, it's a different person there. You're not really getting to know anybody. And now he has a local cafe. And Jacob is so local to that cafe that he has his own table. So it's almost got a reserve sign on it and waiting for him to turn up. Not quite, but almost. So I'm just going to draw on some of the work of Janet Cleese, and there's a link to her work, I think, at the bottom of the page, and also in the resources at the end. You can't force relationships, but you can, you know, you can create and develop the opportunities for those to develop. And Janet talks about the context that you need to develop a relationship, and this kind of really relates back to that 60 and 200 hours that it takes to develop a friendship. If you think about that, it doesn't happen from random people bumping into each other. There might be happy coincidences like that occasionally, but generally there's more to it for all people, and probably even again for people who might not communicate in ways that other people typically do. So I'm just sort of thinking here, I was actually thinking about this in relation to Jacob has a micro enterprise, which is a small business that's really centered around Jacob. COVID times has had an impact on his micro enterprise. And it probably is more of a volunteer role at the moment rather than something that's going to make him money. But we start with Jacob and what are his interests. And so Jacob is a city boy. He loves the nightlife and the action and being out. He loves seeing people he knows. And we began thinking about what's a job that he could do. You know, nightclub bouncer, it's not quite his thing, but really thinking about a job where he might be out and checking out what's going on in the community. So Jacob's micro enterprise is called All Newcastle, and All is an acronym for accessible, live, and local. Given Jacob's, we sometimes say, pre-COVID times anyway, Jacob will turn up to the opening of an envelope. So if there's things going on in the community, then you'll probably find Jacob there. And there's a whole lot of other people who are similar as well. So Jacob is going out in the community events and really got his finger on the pulse where other young people are, and places where there's a really good vibe and good music or art or conversation. So next we're looking at the presence. So Jacob, as I said, would go to the opening of an envelope. So his presence is almost expected when there's new things starting in Newcastle. It might not be just one place, but it's places where things are happening. Jacob's role is to evaluate the vibe of, we call it the vibe of the of various venues and events in Newcastle. So he assesses them for accessibility and inclusion. And he has social connector and a job coach who assist him in this role. So Jacobs will go to a venue and see if it's inclusive or accessible, and then write about it and promote it if it is. And if it's not accessible and inclusive, we just keep quiet about it. We don't promote it. We don't bad it. He doesn't badmouth any business or event, but we don't. The decision is that he does not promote things that are not inclusive. And of course, Jacob's connected with people who have a similar interest in having their finger on the pulse and knowing what's going on around town and being part of that. Just wanted to add, so one of the things that this has taught us is that the community is full of opportunities. So there's lots going on in our communities all the time. Even in COVID times, when people took everything off, out maybe away from face-to-face, but to online activities. And it's made it harder. Certainly inclusion and connecting to the community is certainly harder if you have been unable to go out for a period of time, or have to protect yourself by staying at home, but really looking for those opportunities to connect with for the Zoom, for example. So there's one event in Newcastle where Jacob is where it's called Blues Night, and it's every Thursday night at a pub in Newcastle, Blues Jam. And Jacob really loves going along there, but since COVID that's been cancelled. But they have it online. So Jacob's online watching it, but B, he's promoting that beforehand, so that people who go, gee, Blues Jam's cancelled. Well, actually it's not, it's just in a different format. This is Jacob's Toastmasters group. Jacob's been a member of Toastmasters since golly gosh, many years. So I mentioned before, Jake has difficulty with communicating, and he uses a communication book and a iPad to talk. But years ago, he was asked to speak at a conference, and I almost said, oh, no, I'll do it. That's me. But the topic was decision making, and I thought, gee, I better ask Jacob if he wants to. And Jake hadn't at that stage any experience with speaking, presentations and speaking at conferences and events and such. So we thought that it would be a really good idea if he joined the Toastmasters group at the university, the local Toastmasters group. And Jacob's just loved it. And he has done a number of presentations and travelled around Australia doing presentations, but Toastmasters continues to be a weekly part of his life, and that's gone to Zoom. So it took a little while for, initially Jacob was really struggled with the Zoom. It wasn't quite the same as seeing everybody in person and having that lovely warm reception that he was used to. But now he's really enjoying it. He's really enjoying it. The other thing just is, looking for, opportunities in the community where you can safely engage. So that might be things like going to the park with friends, or with neighbors, and socially distancing, or as I said before, those kind of driveway get-togethers as well, or perhaps, and being the instigator and organizing of those. But really just looking around the community and seeing what's going on. There's sometimes you can find that in newspapers, you can find that on Facebook as well if you've got a local Facebook group.
Now, you've also got a lot of information too usually on the council website.
The council websites are great, yeah, and knowing what's going on in the local, at the community venues as well. Like if the libraries, the community centres, the neighbourhood centres as well, they've usually got quite a lot of information. You know what? The other thing in our neighbourhood as well, there's lots of signs on. A lot of shops have. This is what Jacob uses quite often to know what's going on as well. There's posters in shop windows of what's going on as well. So, there's a couple of key shops that will just promote local events. So you can just wander down the street and just see what's going on. And sometimes, Jake or with his social connector will take a photo and then go and do some more research when they get back home. So I'm going to get to the role of support worker. We've engaged 2 community connectors, and that's their role. And we call them community connectors because that is, we want them to be mindful that this is their job, that this is absolute. They've got other parts of their role as well, but the main part is to connect. We need someone who understands that understands that their role is to facilitate relationships and not be a paid friend. And I just wanted to really sort of talk about this because it is a bugbear of mine, one, but it's also it's a bit of a cop-out. The support workers, helping someone to develop a relationship can take time and it requires skills. And just being sociable yourself doesn't necessarily mean you'll be good for the role. You need to be able to assist a person to create those connections, and that's really important. It is far easier to become a paid friend, but there's no such thing. There is no such thing as a paid friend. If you're paid to be with somebody, you're not a friend. Now, I know there can be blurry lines with relationship-based support, but if you were not going to be there unless you're paid, then you're not a friend. There's no such thing as a paid friend. And the idea of having a support worker as that is a really poor substitute for relationships, and it's not a safeguard. We also really need someone who understands the importance of social inclusion. And one of the other things, because this stuff is tricky, this stuff is really, helping someone, particularly with complex communication needs, to develop friendships is not the easiest job to do and requires lots of thought and mindfulness. So we have engaged someone previously who sort of did it for a while and then started suggesting, have you thought about writing for the disabled or sailability? I'm like, well, there's nothing about sailability that Jacob would like. He doesn't like being wet or cold. So I can't really see that being something that he'd be interested in. And horse riding as well. It's not his thing, but it just became that, I think they found the role too difficult and then defaulted to activities that keep people with disabilities separate from the rest of the community.
Yeah, and I think certainly a common practice that occurs whenever you congregate people like that around people with disabilities around a particular activity is that the broader community tend to stay right away, and it then becomes a complete barrier in relation to making meaningful relationships around an interest that's actually there other than just having a disability.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think the other part of that is also that people are grouped together, not necessarily, people who's doing sailability who actually doesn't like there might be people who are there just because it's a disabled group as opposed to having an interest in sailing or horse riding or whatever. Now, some people do have an interest in that. But yeah, it's usually around the grouping rather than the particular activity that people have an interest or passion in. So we sort of have, we need somebody who's got their finger on the pulse and can, discover what Jacob's interests are, and sometimes that might be stretching Jacob a little bit and trying new things out. That's really important. But having, and also, just being able to map those possibilities for connection. We sort of really want someone who really understands that that their role is to do the finding of opportunities for Jacob, or following up when we know that when we know that when we know there's opportunities there. And it's just about being there, developing, I suppose, thinking about that 60 hours again, like sort of seeing those same people and each time incrementally building those relationships. The art of asking is something that's really, really incredibly important. And there's some great resources that resourcing inclusive communities have around this. I think that as Jacob's mum, I've actually find myself really scared, to be honest. I find it really hard to ask for things on Jacob's behalf. And that is because I carry the sadness of Jacob's rejection previously in his life. And I have this terrible fear of it. People will say no. So I am not the right person. I don't have the resilience to do it. And I think that's really, when you're looking at support from other people, that's a role that I would really recommend handing over to someone who has great skills in knowing who to ask, when to ask, etc. And also just that not being something that as a parent is my responsibility anyway. So once again, someone who can break the ice and who knows when they're needed and when they can fade away as well. So that's, there's situations where I've been and I've seen people with support workers, and the support workers are an active participant, and sometimes that's okay, but sometimes you actually just need to fade into the background. You're just a supporting role there in the background if the person needs you.
I think a lot of issues that people have had previously with this too, Linda, is around the support person actually understanding exactly what their role is.
Yeah.
In this instance, so that they can actually, and it's not everybody's skill set by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and I think that's what we kind of look for, people who have got great social skills, but it goes beyond that, because you can have great social skills and make friends easily yourself, but can you transfer those that ability to helping Jacob make those connections? And it requires a high level of mindfulness, and once again, that notion of this is your job. And we know it's difficult. We know it's going to take time. We know there's barriers. Sorry, I shouldn't say it's difficult. We know there's barriers, and we know it's going to take time. And it's just that perseverance and that canniness as well, of sort of not ever letting a chance go by if you possibly can. So, when there's an opportunity or a spark between two people, then actually noting that down. And I don't know if I'm going to talk about that, but one of the things that we do is we map Jacob's relationships, because Jacob could be out with a support worker, and there might be some interaction with some people, and Jacob's just starting to get to know them, and then he's out with another support worker, and he is meeting those same people, but the other support worker doesn't know the relationship. So we map that so that it's collected in our in the information about Jacob's day, and in a place where people can see that the relationships Jacob's developing with people, or does Jacob know already, and who's important, and just a little bit about the person, because that's going to be something that Jacob finds really hard to know. Jacob, as I said, uses a communication book and a communication device. So just even once you it's actually a nice little way of kind of upping the step with people he's meeting, is, can we add your photo to Jacob's communication book? And very, very rarely will anyone say no, but yes, most times people are really happy to have their picture added to Jacob's communication book of people I know. It sort of goes to a people I know page, and then it transfers across to friend page as those relationships develop. Yeah, so there's also Jacob needs support to maintain relationships that he's already got. So there's some things there that the support worker can prompt Jacob and support him to make sure that he is attentive to the relationships he has and the relationships that are developing. So that's, sometimes that can be just as simple as a Facebook, hey, how you doing? Or a message, how you doing? Um, FaceTiming, a birthday card, or Jake quite likes getting paints out and doing some design. So sort of talk to him about creating cards from that. They're just little handmade cards which have got a nice little personal touch, and just being aware when people he knows he's having a birthday, and sending a card or dropping a card in a letterbox.
And just about 10 minutes before 2:30.
Okay, thank you. I'm nearly there, nearly there. So I wanted to talk about volunteer roles as well, because these are usually free, for example, so they usually don't cost a lot or it cost much to be involved in. Um, so really just thinking about what's going on in the community, we look at opportunities to move from a spectator or a participant even to a volunteer organizer or marshal. So we have a colour run in our neighbourhood most years. That's where people run around wearing white shirts and have colour thrown over them. It's based on a festival in India, and it's lots of fun. But Jacob, for the first year, we saw it. In the second year, Jacob participated, and the third year, he volunteered to be a marshal, which gives people directions. And it just means that there's a lot more opportunity to meet people and connect, you do volunteer training, and there's more opportunities there. So looking at those kind of things. And of course, they're volunteer roles that match your gifts and skills. So you're sharing the opportunity, sharing the interactions and the time and space with other people who have similar goals and skills. Goals, passions and interests. So you're looking at sharing with other people who share those interests. So your local surf club, people who are interested in going to the beach and things like that. I think there's really good to look at work roles just generally. Work roles, we make a lot of relationships through our work. I'm just thinking of myself. I've got lots of friends now that I've met through my work over the years. So this is a really important thing to think about, being part of someone's life. And I just would refer you to the new project that Resourcing Inclusive Communities will be running around finding employment opportunities for young people leaving school. It really is, it's vital for developing your relationships, as well as the obvious benefits of having a job and purpose and contributing. Volunteer roles, the only little thing I would just say about volunteer roles that where you hope to get a job, I'm always a little careful, because sometimes you could be volunteering in a role that could be a paid job and no one sees the point of paying you. So I would often say that if you're looking at volunteering for a job that you want, like a work experience role, make it time limited, because if there's more opportunities to develop paid employment from that. And of course, looking for paid roles. Just relationship maintenance. We've actually just talked a little bit about this already. Paying attention to relationships, not letting them just sit on the sidelines or be neglected. And that's something that, as I said, Jacob needs assistance with. So actually having a map of the relationships Jacob has, and keeping tabs on them, I suppose, because there is a number of people supporting Jacob. That means that Jacob is on top of it. He is being a good friend. He is developing his relationship from acquaintance to friendship. And that's the other thing, is sort of taking it to the next level, offering help to help people, asking a favor, just something really, really small that just gives you that extra level of connection. Inviting people for coffee, at Toastmasters, the timing of that was a little bit tricky, because Jacob would it finishes quite late in the evening and people usually want to get home. So Jacob, what instead with his support workers were doing was just inviting someone, saying, hey, you want to meet up before Toastmasters? Let's have a coffee at the university. And once again, showing appreciation and being thoughtful. And that's just really something that Jacob just needs assistance with, not because he's not thoughtful, but just because he needs assistance to carry that out. Inviting people in, I think this is really interesting as well. Quite often there's people that know Jacob and they just, and they're interested in him and there's a spark, but they're just not sure of what the next step is. And I think, once again, because we see so many people with disabilities sort of surrounded by services, sometimes people can think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't overstep the mark. But of course, if that support's done well, then there should be an opportunity for them to feel comfortable, or just actually extending the invitation. Come on over, let's go for a coffee. Why don't we have lunch in the park one day? And once again, scheduling time. These are good things for all of us to think about as well, for maintaining and developing our relationships, but just needs a bit more concerted effort when a person has a disability. So I just wanted to talk about how we could use our NDIS funding. So of course we can use our NDIS funding for a support worker in the community. There is some opportunities to use your funding potentially if you're requiring a support worker for things that, if you have to purchase a ticket for a support worker, or if you need support to go to an event, then there may be some possibilities that, once again, when you self-manage your funding, to pay for those additional costs that you incur because you have a disability. There's a couple of line items in the price guide which are really, really useful as well. So if I was in charge of the NDIS, which I'm not, so this is, as I have said, this is advice, this is information, not advice. But I think, given the importance of community connection, that there should be opportunities for people to use their funding to facilitate that or to cultivate community connection. Day programs generally offer a parallel life. So most day programs are offering most things that are offered in the community. There's Zumba classes, there's drama classes. There is a whole range of ways that you can use your NDIS. You can go to a day program and do a group support, saleability, etc. There's lots and lots and lots.
One of the things that we often say to people, Linda, is that whenever people, because they've got a disability, are being congregated together, a question probably needs to be asked as to why, because that does not become the interest point.
No, that's exactly right. But what I was thinking about with that, Cecile, also is that these programs are offered often for free from the profits that the service provider has. So they get an NDIS benchmark payment, and then they have a support worker who knows how to do Zumba.
And there's some very, very strong messages to the rest of the community around people with disability have to be grouped together.
Yeah. So the cost of participating in community can be a barrier. As I said, look for the free things first. That's really important. But if there's an opportunity to participate in the community and cultivate connections, then I'd really, really recommend it. And there are 2 line items in the price guide which give you scope to do that. I would always, so there's one in the core funding where you can see there that you can use funds if you're at risk of isolation to participate in some activities, course fees and membership fees. And there's another one in a capacity building category called increased social and community participation. And once again, there's some scope there. Everyone's situation is unique, and I can't say whether or not that is a legitimate use of funding for anybody. So I would say use the self-management guide. Page 8 of a self-management guide has a number of criteria, including, will it help you build connections in the community? So use page 8, the criteria of page 8, if you want to think about using your NDIS funding to help you to have a greater presence in the community and help you cultivate those relationships. So that's it. I'm just really aware that we're running out of time. So I'm going to go to the poll and see if people feel a bit more confident in building community connections in relationships for yourself. So Clara, are you able to launch that poll?
Okay.
Great.
I will end the poll.
Thank you. And I think...
Over to Cecile for the questions.
Yeah, over to Cecile for the questions. So we've some information here about resources from family advocacy and resourcing inclusive communities, and I've just got some helpful resources here as well. I just wanted to really plug the resourcing inclusive communities resources, because there's a real wealth of resources there. Certainly the Self-Management Hub has is linking to a lot of those resources, and just really there's great resources there for thinking about connecting to the community.
Yeah, and I'd probably like to say too, we've actually got a booklet specifically called Developing Community Connections that steps through
And it's there at the top. Sorry, Cecile, it is there at the top of my list of resources, because it's awesome. It's a really awesome booklet.
Yeah, and for those online too, if you actually want to get a hard copy of that, all you've got to do is contact the office, and we can actually we can even send out a box if that's what you require. So just give us a call or send us an email.
Awesome. Okay, we'll go to questions.
Go to questions. Okay, so how often do freely given relationships based around an activity or shared interest become something more that extends beyond that activity?
Look, I think, as I said with Jacob, I'm just trying to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so I think with Jacob, a Toastmasters is a really good example. I think actually Jacob had been going to Toastmasters for perhaps a year before he really started having relationships with other people outside of Toastmasters. So, it started with, a coffee beforehand, or invites to think community events that he was going to as well. Like, hey, I'm going to be at Olive Tree Markets on Saturday. There's some bands playing. Do you want to meet there? So so that was sort of, they're the sort of ways that Jacob just created those relationships. It is difficult. I think that it does take effort and concentration and mindfulness around it. So I don't know how often. I think that you need to be observing where there is a spark and mutual interest, so that Jacob's showing that he's interested in Kylie, and Kylie's showing that she's interested in Jacob, and then taking it to that next place. But it does take time. I think that 60 hours, I was really amazed by that. I thought that was really, really interesting, and that's just for everybody, that it, you keep turning up, and those relationships are more likely to develop.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Okay, so has Jacob met people in his community local area who continue a friendship with him and join in the activities apart from Postmasters and other organised activities?
I think that there's people, so there are a few people in the neighbourhood that he's just got to know and now socialises with. So Amy, who is the lady in the picture that we started with, there's a picture of Jacob and his social connector, Shannon and Amy, and now Amy is part of a group of people who join Jacob for get-togethers, or just Friday afternoon hanging out at the pub and things like that. So she's part of the invite list, and not quite often comes along to that.
Yeah, and I think an important point to that as well, and if we think of our own lives and the more connections that we have in community, the more people that we meet, and more groups that we're involved with, actually broadens our chances of actually making connections, and that spark, as Linda said, being there. So certainly thinking very similarly to how we would treat creating our own friendships, but also being more intentional around how that person may need support.
Yeah,
to
it's
be able to,
intentional.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it really is, for Jacob in particular, it's communication. So, Jacob, he really likes his GP, and he's asked her out for coffee a few times. It happens to be in a consultation with him, and so she's working and has not been able to. But there is the idea that at some point they will go for coffee. So that's just another little example. It's probably a more tricky one because there is a professional relationship between them already.
Yep. Okay, so social connectors, the social connectors would be paid by the NDIS.
That's right. So we engage social connectors as a support worker role. So that's funded through Jacob's plan. Yes.
Okay. So we've got a question here. We're actually doing the opposite of all this during the COVID crisis. How do we turn this around when the threat is growing again?
It's the $1,000,000 question.
That's a $1,000,000 question.
It is a $1,000,000 question. Look, Jake's birthday is coming up really shortly, and we thought initially that we could do a COVID safe party in the park. We are now just thinking that there's just emerging a few cases in our area, and we've had to take that on, offline. Sorry, we've made that online now. So instead of a face-to-face get together, we just think there's probably too many risks. And even if we did it as safely as we possibly can, it's just not a good look necessarily when we're actually really wanting to be safeguarding Jacob around COVID. So if we're asking everybody else to socially isolate, we should actually, or social distance, we should be doing it ourselves. So we're looking at now Jacob doing something on having a Zoom get together. He did through March and April in particular. Jacob had regular get-togethers with people on Zoom on a Friday afternoon. There seems to be a lot of drinking around my son. I don't know why, but there was a
Might
Friday
be the
afternoon.
age, Linda.
Yeah, it might be the age. He is 28. Yeah, so there's just a lot. There was people in his support team, his circle, all coming together on a Zoom. On about 5:30 on a Friday afternoon for an hour to touch base. Once again, those regular FaceTimes, just sending someone a message saying, "Hi, would you like to catch up on FaceTime for a little while?" And just trying to find the ways to do it online if you can. And once again, the neighbours, looking at your neighbours, if you can have a neighbourhood get together where you all sit in your driveways, those sort of things. So just really thinking about opportunities where it's safe, where it's online or where it's safe. Commenting on Facebook and Instagram and those sort of things as well just keeps people like, hey, I've just put a Facebook post up and Jacob likes it and he's just made a comment or he's shared it with somebody. So those kind of things can also keep you in the forefront of other people's minds as well.
Yep.
So
wonderful.
yeah.
Now we've got one more question, Linda, and could support workers turn into a friend? What's your experience with that?
Look, we love our support workers, and Jacob loves his support workers. Years ago, I've been quite blunt with Jacob around this. So years ago, we started recruiting our own support workers, and it was a lovely, lovely, lovely girl called Katrina. And one of the first things Jacob asked when he met her was, "Is she my girlfriend?" I'm like, "Oh, darling, no, no." So it was really indicating that Jacob was, he is wanting those sort of relationships. I've been really just Jacob, when support workers are paid workers, so he does understand that. But we do have blurry lines. So a while ago, it was a Sunday, and Jacob and I were hanging out together, and I can't remember what happened, but I think I've got a better offer. And I thought, well, I'll see if there's anyone in Jake's support team. It was something Jacob wouldn't enjoy. So I was dumping my son essentially. I put it out to Jake's support team to see if anyone was available to hang with Jake or support him that afternoon while I went and did something that I thought was more fun. Please don't judge me. But anyhow, one of Jacob's support workers, Hugh, came back and said, "Yeah, sure. We're hanging out at the park with some friends." So came along, picked up Jacob. They went and hung out at the park with some friends of his and some kids, and had a nice afternoon. And the next day was I received the timesheets, and that wasn't on Hugh's timesheet. I'm like, Hugh, you forgot to put in Sunday. So no. It was Jacob. We're just hanging with Jacob. And I'm like, well, it's Sunday. It's penalty rates. It's no. That was just hanging with Jacob. That's just really good fun to do. And Hugh has done a few things like that. He's invited Jacob along to gigs where he's playing. He's a musician. And Jacob's just been supported by other audience members who are people Jacob knows. They're friends of Jacob's now. They're people that Jacob's got to know through going to regular events. So Jake's in the audience being supported. Hugh is there. Jake's got complex health issues, so Hugh is there, admittedly performing on stage, but he is there if Jake does need support. But basically, Jake's just one of the members of the audience being supported by other people who are enjoying the same thing as he is.
Wonderful. Thanks, Linda. That comes to the end of our questions.
Okay.
And I think the end of our webinar.
And the end of our webinar. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I hope it was useful and helpful. As Cecile said, and the Community Connections booklet is awesome. It just really has some terrific information in there. So I really recommend you get along to do yourself a favour and get along to Resourcing Inclusive Communities and have a look at their resources, and particularly that Community Connection booklet.